6 a.m. The coffee was still hot in my hand when I stepped outside, only to feel my stomach drop. My Jeep was gone. Not misplaced, not borrowed, flat out stolen. And the kicker? It wasn't some random thief chasing catalytic converters. No, this was much worse. My security camera gave me the answer at 2 a.m. on the dot. Dolores Crenshaw herself, queen of Pinewood tyranny, stood in her nightgown, directing a tow truck like she was conducting a symphony. Bolt cutters glinted in the streetlight as she snapped my lock clean through. Her manicured nails, painted a venomous red, pointed like daggers toward my Jeep. If the footage had a smell, you'd catch her overpowering floral perfume mixed with gasoline. The cherry on top. A paper taped to my front door, fluttering in the morning air. Unauthorized vehicle modifications violate Section 12.3b. Vehicle impounded pending compliance review. Management. That single crinkle of paper still triggers my blood pressure. What Dolores didn't know. She had just crossed the line from neighborhood harassment into a federal crime. That Jeep wasn't just a car. It was government property, customized for federal fieldwork. And me? I don't exactly roll over when someone challenges me. So, let me ask you, what would you do if your HOA president straight up stole your government-issued ride while you slept? Drop a comment about where you're tuning in from, and if you've had your own HOA nightmare, because mine. It started long before this Jeep fiasco. My name is Marcus Steele. I'm 34 years old, and my job, believe it or not, is investigating wildlife crimes for the federal government. Think smugglers, poachers, or backyard tiger enthusiasts. That's my beat. This particular assignment had me planted in Pinewood Estates, Colorado. On the surface, it's an idyllic suburb, 200 near-identical homes, each worth around $400,000. Every mailbox is beige, the grass trimmed to ruler precision, and the air perpetually smells of fertilizer and leaf blowers roaring every Tuesday at 7 a.m. This isn't just a neighborhood, it's a place where conformity is enforced like law, and Dolores sat at the top like a dictator in pearls. My Jeep looked like just another weekend warrior's toy. Except beneath the camouflage were antennas, reinforced bumpers, and GPS trackers powerful enough to monitor smugglers across state lines. Subtle mods, but essential for my work. To anyone else, it was just a rugged SUV. To me, it was a mobile command unit. Then came Dolores Crenshaw, 60 years old, bleached blonde, driving a spotless white BMW X5 she worshipped like a deity. Twice a week, she had it detailed as if the car's shine was a symbol of her worth. A divorced ex-real estate agent who poured all her bitterness into her new empire, the Pinewood Estates HOA. She occupied the largest home on the corner lot, her front lawn sculpted like a museum exhibit and trimmed weekly by hired landscapers who arrived every Thursday at precisely 9 a.m. The first week I moved in, she appeared at my door with a welcome basket, and a 47-page HOA rulebook bound in plastic, still reeking of fresh ink. The second week, I got my first written warning. My Jeep, apparently, was too aggressive in appearance. Off-road tires were now a menace to the community's aesthetic values. By the third week, my odd working hours had raised eyebrows. Apparently, leaving at midnight or returning at dawn for federal assignments made me a suspicious neighbor. I decided to play it cool. I showed up at the next HOA meeting with donuts, good ones, from the high-end bakery downtown, not the cheap grocery store kind. The community center reeked of stale coffee and disappointment. Dolores presided at the head of the table like she was Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Her board was laughable. A retired accountant who agreed with her every word, a yoga instructor who looked perpetually lost, and an insurance salesman glued to his phone like the meeting was beneath him. But things turned personal at the neighborhood barbecue. Dolores tried her signature move, over-the-top friendliness, laced with flirtation. The kind that feels less like hospitality and more like a spider weaving a web. I brushed her off politely. I had no interest in entertaining her games, especially while working an active investigation. Her smile froze, but her eyes burned. And from that moment on, I wasn't just a homeowner under her scrutiny, I was her enemy. At first, she targeted my Jeep. The oversized tires. The strange antenna placement. Equipment she couldn't identify but instinctively knew didn't belong in her perfect little suburb. That was the spark that ignited the war. I remembered my federal training: no local ordinance, no HOA bylaw, no neighborhood queen with a pearl necklace could override federal law. Constitutional supremacy was clear, federal requirements trumped civilian nonsense. But apparently, nobody had taught that lesson to Dolores Crenshaw. Her campaign against me picked up speed fast. First came the formal complaint: my Jeep, she claimed, violated residential aesthetic standards and compromised community harmony. She presented photographs showing my vehicle supposedly parked over property lines. Except the pictures were doctored, angles twisted, measuring tapes positioned to suggest violations that didn't exist. The fraud was so blatant it would have been laughable, if the consequences weren't real. Next came the so-called emergency board meeting. Picture a kangaroo court with all the legitimacy of a middle school mock trial. Dolores presided with smug satisfaction, her board of followers nodding along as if her every word carried divine authority. The accountant agreed instantly, the insurance salesman didn't even look up from his phone, and the yoga instructor muttered a hesitant "no" that was quickly drowned out. The verdict? 3-1 against me. A fine of $200 per day until my Jeep was compliant. The only dissenter was poor Nancy, the yoga instructor, God bless her chakras for at least trying. Dolores's smirk said it all. She thought she trapped me in her net. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't just documenting wildlife smugglers anymore, I was documenting her. Every meeting, every fake measurement, every manipulated photograph, it was all evidence. 2 days later, she called another urgent board meeting. The urgency wasn't about safety or community concerns. It was about her ego. I had turned down her barbecue flotation, and that rejection stung deeper than any violation notice could cover. This time, the meeting wasn't at the community center. She staged it in her oversized living room, an ocean of cream-colored furniture drowning in the overwhelming scent of vanilla air freshener. On the coffee table sat her laptop, ready to project what she called her Community Standards Enforcement Initiative. Because nothing screams unstable HOA president quite like weaponizing PowerPoint on a Tuesday night. Her board members looked just as pitiful as before. Harold, the accountant, nodded like a bobblehead. Nancy stared off, clearly wishing she was anywhere else. Pete scrolled on his phone, half absent. Marcus Steele's vehicle, Dolores declared with the gravitas of a courtroom prosecutor, is in direct violation of our standards. She clicked through a slideshow of photos she'd clearly snapped while creeping around my driveway like a tabloid paparazzo. Her evidence was laughable: distorted angles, property lines that didn't exist, and measurements that defied physics. One slide literally suggested my Jeep was parked 6 inches over a boundary that turned out to be my neighbor's driveway. Watching it was like witnessing someone try to prove gravity wrong with interpretive dance. Then came her big finish. She raised her chin, voice dripping with false authority. This military-style vehicle threatens property values and community safety. Harold nearly sprained his neck, nodding in agreement. The others fell in line. Another 3-1 vote. Another $200 fine slapped onto my record. Democracy in action, suburban style. The irony? The HOA's own covenant had a crystal-clear exemption clause: any vehicle modified for professional purposes was legally protected, if properly registered. And mine was. The paperwork wasn't just official, it carried federal insignia so secure it made monopoly money look real by comparison. I wasn't playing cowboy here. I followed protocol. I requested a formal hearing. I filed the paperwork. I even brought backup: Lieutenant Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran with shoulders like a linebacker and a stare that could make criminals confess their childhood sins. When we walked into Dolores's vanilla-scented living room for the hearing, she'd upped the ambience with lavender candles. It was less homeowners association and more cover-up for a federal crime scene. I laid out my case point by point: federal registration, the professional exemption clause, the supremacy doctrine. Rodriguez explained the purpose of my modifications, how my Jeep wasn't just a vehicle but a tool that had helped track international wildlife smugglers worth millions. And yet Dolores wasn't ready to quit. She threw her nuclear option on the table. "How do we even know these credentials aren't fake?" she demanded, pointing at Rodriguez's badge like she was suddenly a forensic examiner. "For all we know, he could be a criminal with forged documents. People fake things all the time." The air in the room shifted. Her words, "these people," hung there like a toxic cloud. Her board members looked down at their shoes, avoiding eye contact. But when it came time to vote, they still sided with her. Harold muttered, "Better safe than sorry." Pete nodded without lifting his eyes from his phone. Nancy, once again, was the only voice of reason. But the fines stood. $200 a day. By the end of 12 days, I had a bill for $2,400 taped to my door. That's when my training fully kicked in. When civilians try to scam you, follow the money. Always. I ran background checks, standard procedure. And that's when the truth exploded wide open. Dolores wasn't just acting as HOA president. She owned 30% of Rapid Recovery Towing, through her brother-in-law, Danny Crenshaw. Every single car she had impounded funneled money right back into her pockets through towing fees, storage charges, and bogus administrative costs. This wasn't neighborhood enforcement. This was extortion. Plain and simple. The discovery hit me like a hammer wrapped in clarity. Dolores wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was running a side hustle, an extortion ring dressed up in HOA bylaws. Every warning, every bogus citation, every tow was money funneling into her brother-in-law's business. And by extension, hers. The cracks in Pinewood began to show. You had the Team Dolores crowd, people too timid to fight back, or too gullible to see through her charade. They clung to her illusion of order like frightened sheep, nodding along as she preached about standards and safety. Then there was Team Marcus, small at first, but growing. It was led by Frank, an 82-year-old Vietnam vet who recognized tyranny when he saw it, whether it wore a uniform or a pearl necklace. Frank left handwritten notes under my door in neat cursive, the kind of script they don't even teach in schools anymore: "Don't give up. We've seen this before. She'll fall." But Dolores wasn't about to loosen her grip. Her campaign escalated online. Cryptic Facebook posts appeared about dangerous outsiders and federal imposters threatening family values. She crafted a narrative where I was the villain, an unpredictable threat to the quiet streets of Pinewood. And herself? She cast as the brave defender, the motherly protector shielding children from lurking dangers. I let her dig her own grave. Rule number 1 in federal work: never interrupt your enemy when they're actively incriminating themselves. Dolores was generating enough evidence to fuel a dozen federal cases, and she didn't even know it. But harassment wasn't enough for her. She wanted total annihilation. 2 weeks after her kangaroo court slapped me with fines, she brought in outside muscle. Enter Rick Sampson, a private investigator whose vibe screamed, "Mall cop reject." The man reeked of cheap cologne and desperation, trailing me with all the subtlety of a marching band. He thought he was undercover. In reality, he was about as inconspicuous as a spotlight. His assignment? Dig up dirt. Dolores wanted proof that I wasn't who I said I was. Proof that I was dangerous, unstable, anything she could use to justify her crusade. But here's the irony: the more Rick followed me, the more he uncovered my real work. He caught glimpses of my surveillance routines, late-night drives, discreet handoffs. All legitimate federal tasks connected to an ongoing wildlife trafficking investigation. Yet in Dolores's fevered imagination, this became, he's bringing dangerous criminals into our neighborhood. Her paranoia evolved into a full-blown smear campaign. She launched a petition accusing me of being a clear and present danger to the community. 67 signatures appeared, neighbors who probably thought due process was a plumbing term. That was my signal. Time for my own investigation. I dove into federal databases. Compared to them, Google looks like a toy. Dolores's history unfolded like a rap sheet disguised as a resume. Her real estate license. Suspended twice in Arizona for ethical violations. Which is bureaucratic code for lied through her teeth to clients. She'd covered up termite damage, ignored foundation cracks, and pocketed commissions until the state finally pulled the plug. Her HOA career wasn't spotless either. In Phoenix, she'd served on another board, until $12,000 mysteriously vanished from community accounts. She skipped town before the audit wrapped up. Classic suburban fugitive move. Her current business, Sunshine Property Management. No bonding. No insurance. Operating illegally while collecting fees from 200 families. It was like finding out your dentist never went to dental school, but still billed you full price for root canals. Then came the nuclear escalation. I was away on assignment, tracking smugglers through Nevada. 3 days in the desert, long hours, little sleep. When I returned, my driveway was empty. My lock was severed, bolt cutters still lying in the dirt like taunting relics. The fury that hit me was sharp enough to taste metallic on my tongue. Dolores had done it. She'd actually crossed the line. The footage showed her at 2 a.m., pearls gleaming, directing Danny's tow truck like she owned the streets. She'd cut through a federal lock. She'd taken a federal vehicle. And she'd committed a crime that carried a minimum $10,000 fine and potential prison time. But Dolores was too intoxicated by her suburban power trip to recognize the danger. My Jeep sat in an impound lot 40 miles away, behind chain-link fencing topped with razor wire. The smell of motor oil and hopelessness hung in the air. Rows of vehicles lined up like prisoners, all feeding Danny's little empire, racking up $150 a day in storage fees. I could have ended it right then. I could have had Dolores in cuffs before sunrise. But sometimes you don't grab the shark, you let the smaller fish swim, drawing bigger predators into the net. My instincts told me this wasn't just about me. And I was right. Within days, other neighbors started getting violation notices. And these weren't your average HOA complaints. They were absurd. Tom down the street was fined $500 for unauthorized marine vessel storage. Translation, his fishing boat. The same one legally parked in his driveway for 6 years. The Martinez family received threats of immediate towing for their RV, even though they had parking rights grandfathered in long before Dolores's reign. The pattern was unmistakable. Anyone who questioned her, anyone who resisted, anyone with something worth towing, suddenly became a target. This wasn't community improvement. It was organized theft dressed up as HOA enforcement. And Dolores was just getting started. The fraud pattern was coming into focus, but I wasn't the only one who saw it. Fate handed me an ally in the form of Janet Kowalski, my neighbor 3 doors down. Janet wasn't just any resident. She was a forensic accountant, the kind of person who could smell irregularities in financial statements the way a bloodhound scents contraband. She approached me cautiously, like a member of an underground resistance. One evening, as I stepped out to grab the mail, she whispered, "These HOA numbers don't add up. Something stinks." She'd already been a target herself. Dolores fined her $300 for planting pink roses, claiming they didn't conform to approved community colors. Janet's response wasn't gardening scissors, it was spreadsheets. She started combing through HOA ledgers, and what she found made her eyes widen. Duplicate payments. Phantom expenses. Emergency landscaping bills in the middle of January snowstorms. Security consulting invoices with no evidence of services rendered. The paper trail was rotten to its core. Meanwhile, Dolores wasn't slowing down. Her obsession with me deepened to paranoia. She wasn't content with fines and towing anymore. She wanted to destroy me completely. And the deeper Janet dug, the more evidence emerged that this wasn't just power tripping, it was a criminal enterprise. Rodriguez got involved the moment theft of government property crossed his desk. That phrase alone lights up alarms in federal agencies. And when Janet's early audit hinted at embezzlement, the FBI Financial Crimes Unit perked up like hounds on a fresh trail. They love nothing more than when fraudsters write their own evidence into official records. Headquarters gave the order, continue the undercover operation. Dolores had already tripped over federal property crimes. Now we had reason to suspect she was running an embezzlement scheme on top of it. The deeper she dug, the bigger the crater she'd fall into. But the neighborhood climate was getting uglier by the day. Dolores weaponized the HOA system with ruthless efficiency. Anyone who questioned her decisions faced threats. Contractors were told not to do business with troublemakers. Residents who supported me found violation notices on their doors, trumped-up nonsense meant to bleed them dry. Basic home maintenance became political warfare. You weren't just fixing a roof, you were choosing sides. Through it all, I documented everything. Every threatening letter. Every bogus citation. Every overheard slur Dolores let slip when she thought no one was recording. Federal casework thrives on precision, and she was giving me a mountain of evidence gift-wrapped in arrogance. The more Janet uncovered, the worse it looked. Tens of thousands of dollars missing. HOA reserve funds dwindling without explanation. Shell payments routed through Danny's towing company. It wasn't just sloppy accounting, it was a deliberate siphoning operation. Dolores had turned Pinewood Estates into her personal ATM. The neighborhood itself started fracturing like glass under pressure. On one side, her loyalists repeated her propaganda, terrified of crossing the HOA queen. On the other, families whispered in support of me, rallying in secret around Frank, the Vietnam vet, who treated the whole ordeal like a covert mission. His garage became our unofficial safe house, smelling of motor oil, filled with folding chairs, neighbors huddled in defiance. One evening, 23 families showed up to share their own Dolores horror stories. Tom revealed he'd been billed over $20,000 in fabricated, marine vessel violations. The Martinez family presented $8,900 in phony repair charges for work never done. Then came Mrs. Bennett. Her story hit me harder than any fine or false claim ever could. She was 84, a naturalized citizen who'd waited decades for the privilege of flying the American flag in her yard. Dolores fined her $450 for unauthorized cultural displays because the flag was the wrong size. That was the moment it stopped being about me or my Jeep. Dolores wasn't just harassing individuals. She was targeting veterans, minorities, and anyone who didn't fit her warped vision of suburban perfection. This wasn't just theft anymore. It was systemic discrimination wrapped in the language of HOA bylaws. Dolores's vendetta was evolving into something darker. The more pressure mounted, the more reckless she became. She didn't just want to fine me into submission. She wanted to erase me entirely. Her first escalation came in the form of intimidation lawsuits. Suddenly, neighbors who'd spoken out found themselves threatened with legal action. She drafted defamation claims against families for simply criticizing her leadership. Legalese-laden letters appeared in mailboxes, signed by attorneys who had no idea their client was paying them with stolen funds. Then she started weaponizing the police. I found myself reported for trespassing while checking my own mailbox. Another time, she accused me of harassing her in front of her house, a claim so flimsy that the responding officers, who knew me from federal coordination meetings, laughed it off. They warned her, politely but firmly, not to waste taxpayer resources on personal feuds. But Dolores wasn't done. Her nuclear option was to unleash Rick, the private investigator with too much Axe body spray and not enough common sense. This time, she ordered him to break into my apartment while I was supposedly away. What she didn't know was that federal agents don't just rely on Ring doorbells. My apartment was outfitted with surveillance equipment capable of capturing license plates 3 blocks away. The moment Rick started fumbling with my lock, alarms triggered. By the time he slipped inside, FBI agents were already reviewing the footage. When questioned later, Rick folded instantly. He spilled every detail, from Dolores's instructions to her paranoia-fueled rants. His confession was practically a signed statement of conspiracy to obstruct justice. Meanwhile, Janet's forensic deep dive kept unearthing new layers of rot. What started as suspicious landscaping invoices ballooned into full-on financial crime. She found money routed through shell companies, duplicate payments, and, most damning of all, transfers offshore. Dolores had stashed HOA money in the Cayman Islands. Over $30,000 skimmed from maintenance fees sat in foreign accounts, quietly earning interest while homeowners in Pinewood got squeezed with fake assessments. That discovery kicked the case into a higher gear. Now it wasn't just embezzlement. It was international money laundering. But the worst revelation came when Dolores crossed the line from petty fraud into national security. She'd ordered Danny to give her access to my impounded Jeep. Security footage later showed her prying around inside, snapping photos of equipment she didn't recognize. Encrypted radios. GPS trackers. Antennas connected to active federal operations. In her arrogance, she had no idea what she was looking at. But I did. And so did Rodriguez, when I briefed him. That Jeep wasn't just my ride. It was tied directly to Operation Nightingale, an 18-month federal investigation tracking international wildlife smugglers across 3 states. Dolores's midnight photo shoot hadn't just compromised a neighborhood feud. She had potentially exposed sensitive federal technology, equipment that foreign intelligence services would salivate over. Her little HOA crusade had escalated into a matter of national security. The list of her crimes was stacking like cordwood: theft of government property, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, racketeering, embezzlement, money laundering, and now, potentially, espionage. And the terrifying part? Dolores still thought she was untouchable. Dolores had no idea how deep she'd sunk. Every desperate move she made, every reckless step she took, only tied the noose tighter around her own neck. Janet's obsession with numbers became our secret weapon. She wasn't just poking holes in the HOA's finances anymore, she was dismantling them brick by brick. Her dining table looked like a war room, stacked with binders, highlighted ledgers, and spreadsheets color-coded like battle maps. One night, she slid a manila folder across my kitchen table. Her hands were steady, but her eyes burned with the excitement of someone who had just unearthed a bombshell. "Marcus," she whispered, "she's been forging the minutes." I opened the folder, and it hit me like a physical blow. 8 months' worth of HOA board meeting minutes, every single one fabricated. Dates didn't match. Harold's signature appeared on documents supposedly signed while he was visiting grandchildren in Florida. Pete's name authorized expenditures while he was out of state on business trips. Nancy's votes were recorded in favor of measures she had publicly opposed at earlier meetings. It was a paper trail of lies. Dolores hadn't just abused her power, she had operated with no legal authority at all. Every fine, every towing order, every harassment campaign was built on forged documents. And Janet wasn't done. She kept digging, following money trails Dolores assumed no one would question. What she uncovered next made my federal instincts scream red alert. The HOA's property management contract with Sunshine Management, the very contract Dolores used to justify her authority, was never approved by the insurance company. No bonding. No authorization. No validity. Translation: every single fee homeowners had paid for nearly 2 years was theft. Every contract void. Every action fraud. It wasn't just HOA corruption anymore. It was organized crime, running unchecked under the disguise of community standards. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was waking up. Frank, the Vietnam vet, was rallying more and more residents in his garage-turned-resistance headquarters. The air smelled of oil and rebellion as neighbors swapped their own horror stories. Tom revealed $20,300 in marine vessel violations that existed only in Dolores's imagination. The Martinez family displayed $8,900 in emergency repair bills for work never performed. Each story stacked onto the growing mountain of evidence. But Mrs. Bennett's testimony remained the turning point. The image of an 84-year-old woman being fined for flying the American flag, the wrong size, supposedly, hit everyone in that room like a gut punch. Her hands trembled as she held the notice, her voice cracking as she said, "I waited decades for this country to let me fly this flag. And now she tells me I can't." The garage fell silent. That's when it became crystal clear, this wasn't about lawns or property values anymore. It was about civil rights. Dolores wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was systematically targeting anyone who didn't fit her warped vision of suburban perfection. Veterans, minorities, single mothers, elderly residents, they were all in her crosshairs. And while the community rallied in secret, Dolores doubled down in public. She hired actual lawyers to back her intimidation tactics. She filed false police reports. She flooded social media with paranoid rants about federal imposters and deep state operatives infiltrating Pinewood. Her paranoia made her dangerous. But it also made her sloppy. Every move she made, I documented. Every forged signature, every fake violation, every discriminatory comment, captured, time-stamped, preserved. Prosecutors dream of cases this clean. Dolores was building one against herself, brick by brick. And she didn't even know it. Dolores was unraveling faster than a cheap sweater. Cornered animals are always the most dangerous, and she was lashing out in every direction, clawing at anything she could reach. Her first new tactic was vandalism. One morning, I stepped outside to find my apartment door spray-painted in angry red letters, "Federal Fascist Go Home." Another day, "Government Thug" dripped across the wall like blood under streetlights. But what she didn't realize was that my surveillance system caught everything: high-definition footage of her hired goons slinking around at night, license plates recorded, audio captured. Each incident added another line to her growing list of criminal charges: intimidation, property destruction, harassment. Her next move was psychological warfare. Anonymous flyers appeared on doorsteps, warning residents that I was a deep-cover drug dealer posing as federal law enforcement. Yelp reviews mysteriously tanked for neighbors who supported me, their businesses smeared with fake complaints about suspicious activities and unprofessional conduct. She was weaponizing the internet like some suburban cyber-terrorist. And then came her boldest stunt yet, trying to sabotage my career. She began filing complaints with my federal agency, accusing me of abusing authority, misusing government resources, and threatening civilians. What she didn't realize: every call was recorded. Every complaint logged. Every false accusation added another obstruction of justice charge to her already bloated criminal resume. The desperation stank. You could smell it through her perfume. But Dolores wasn't done draining Pinewood dry. She attempted a special assessment, emergency repair fees billed to every homeowner. $1,800 apiece for infrastructure repairs that didn't exist outside her imagination. Families received threatening notices warning of liens if they didn't pay. When that didn't bring in fast cash, she tried something even riskier. Dolores attempted to take out an $18,000 loan against HOA property using forged board authorizations. The bank's fraud detection system flagged it instantly. Her paperwork was so sloppy it wouldn't have fooled a half-asleep notary. Managers contacted federal investigators before she could blink. Meanwhile, Janet hit pay dirt. Her relentless digging uncovered more offshore accounts, 3 in total. Cayman Islands. Delaware shell companies. Even a suspicious fund in Switzerland. Money from inflated fees and bogus fines flowed through Danny's towing company before vanishing overseas, earning tax-free interest while families in Pinewood tightened their belts. It was breathtakingly stupid. But it was also undeniably criminal. Now federal banking regulators were circling in, eager to nail her for international money laundering. The neighborhood pressure cooker was hissing at full steam. Residents who once feared Dolores were now furious. Anonymous Facebook groups popped up: Pinewood Truth, Stop the Queen, Justice for Pinewood. Screenshots of her harassment circulated online. Photos of fines, violation notices, and doctored evidence piled up, all time-stamped and catalogued. The media caught the scent. Local investigative reporters started calling, digging into whispers of an HOA president accused of stealing a federal agent's vehicle. HOA abuse bloggers, yes, there are entire websites dedicated to tyrants like her, began amplifying the story. Dolores's empire was cracking. And she knew it. The more the walls closed in, the more erratic she became. She hired a crisis PR firm with stolen HOA money, trying to rebrand herself as a concerned leader fighting government overreach. The spin was laughable, especially since every dollar she spent on that PR firm was embezzled from the very neighbors she claimed to protect. Her paranoia metastasized into full-blown delusion. She convinced herself that the federal government was conspiring to take her down, not because of her crimes, but because she was too strong. She started ranting at meetings about deep state plots and federal operatives infiltrating suburban America. The irony was almost too perfect. Because she was right about one thing. Federal operatives had infiltrated Pinewood. And they were watching her every move. Dolores's descent from tyrant to train wreck was accelerating, and the neighborhood had front-row seats. Her breaking point came in broad daylight. At 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, she stormed into the local grocery store wearing yesterday's clothes, hair frazzled, and reeking of wine. In the produce aisle, she began shouting about federal conspiracies and deep state surveillance poisoning organic food. Shoppers froze mid-cart. Parents pulled their kids closer. Phones came out, recording every second of her meltdown. By the time she reached the checkout lane, she was demanding to speak to management about government agents planting tracking devices in the mail. Security footage captured her trying to block the postal worker from delivering letters. Mail obstruction, another felony to tack onto her collection. Her phone harassment also spiraled. One day, she called my federal office 23 times, leaving rambling voicemails about citizen militias and constitutional violations. Behavioral analysts listened in, shaking their heads. Each recording became more evidence of her unraveling mental state, and more proof of obstruction. But her audacity didn't stop there. She attempted perhaps the boldest fraud yet, forging a board resolution to authorize a $50,000 legal defense fund to fight what she called government persecution. She scribbled 3 board members' signatures with the skill of a bored teenager practicing cursive. The bank caught it instantly. The forgeries were so sloppy they might as well have been written in crayon. Next, she tried to mortgage HOA property without authorization. Once again, the bank flagged it and contacted federal investigators. The pattern was undeniable: every time she tried to outsmart the system, she just added more felonies to her record. Meanwhile, the community's patience shattered. 6 different families filed restraining orders after receiving threatening messages that reeked of both desperation and madness. Local police began quiet patrols, while federal marshals discreetly monitored residents who had openly supported me. The media firestorm was relentless. Local news ran with headlines like HOA president accused of stealing federal vehicle. The story went viral, spreading to national outlets and HOA abuse advocacy groups. Blog posts, Facebook rants, Twitter threads, everyone was talking about Pinewood Estates. Then came the bombshell: Dolores's mugshot from her Arizona arrest surfaced online. It painted a clear picture: a repeat offender, hopping from state to state, leaving chaos in her wake. Congressional staffers even started sniffing around. Oversight gaps in HOA management were suddenly a hot topic in Washington. My case was becoming more than neighborhood drama, it was ammunition for federal reform. But Dolores still thought she could wriggle out. In one last act of desperation, she checked herself into a high-priced psychiatric facility, trying to build a mental health defense. It was a familiar white-collar tactic: plead instability, beg for leniency. But federal prosecutors had seen it all before. Too much evidence. Too many victims. Too much publicity. Her new defense attorney was a shark who specialized in hopeless cases, charging obscene rates for clients clinging to straws. His plan? Strike a plea deal in exchange for her cooperation against other shady property managers. But the feds weren't biting. Dolores had dug herself too deep. And as if to seal her own fate, our final confrontation gave me the perfect weapon. Wearing federal recording equipment, I listened as she rambled about her misunderstood decisions. In the middle of her tirade, she confessed, out loud, to targeting Hispanic families because they don't understand American standards, and harassing elderly residents because they're too confused to complain. The recording captured every word. Clear. Undeniable. Systematic discrimination, admitted by her own mouth. Federal prosecutors didn't just smile when they heard it, they applauded. It was the kind of evidence that wins civil rights cases before they even hit the courtroom. Dolores wasn't just a fraud anymore. She was a civil rights violator with a growing rap sheet that looked more like a mafia boss than a suburban president. And the cameras were already rolling. The trap was closing. Federal coordination clicked into place with the precision of a Swiss watch. Grand jury indictments were sealed, waiting for the moment to be unveiled. IRS agents prepared seizure warrants. Federal marshals rehearsed entry routes. Even state regulators lined up, ready to revoke every license Dolores had ever waved around like a badge of authority. But the final act had to play out in public. Dolores needed to implode on stage, in front of the very neighbors she had terrorized for over a year. The venue, the Pinewood Community Center. Folding chairs filled every corner. Over 200 residents packed inside, their frustration bubbling after 18 months of harassment and fraud. The air smelled of burnt coffee, nervous sweat, and electricity, the kind of tension that precedes historic moments. Local TV crews set up cameras. Bloggers streamed live to national audiences hungry for HOA horror stories. Everyone was waiting for the showdown. I made my entrance deliberately. My Jeep had been fully restored, federal insignia now gleaming openly. Government plates reflected the fluorescent lights as I parked out front, no longer undercover. As I stepped inside, conversations hushed. Faces turned. Some neighbors looked relieved, others stunned, but all of them sensed they were about to witness something extraordinary. Then came Dolores. She entered like a dethroned monarch making her last stand. Pearls around her neck, chin raised, flanked by a defense attorney who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Her eyes darted across the room, calculating, defiant, clinging to the illusion that she still had control. The crowd held its breath. I stood slowly, badge wallet in hand. My voice cut through the silence. Before we continue with this so-called vehicle violation dispute, I need to clear up a misunderstanding. Camera shutters clicked like insects. Every lens zoomed in as I opened my credentials. My name is Special Agent Marcus Steele, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, currently assigned to a federal task force investigating international wildlife trafficking operations. The gasp that followed was seismic. Neighbors' jaws dropped as puzzle pieces clicked into place. Months of suspicion, fines, and paranoia suddenly reframed into a federal investigation hiding in plain sight. Frank, the veteran, saluted from his chair. Mrs. Bennett clasped her hands in prayer. Families who had suffered under Dolores's reign leaned forward, eyes wide, realizing justice had finally arrived. I explained what Dolores had dismissed as unauthorized vehicle modifications. The antennas. The reinforced bumpers. The tracking gear. Every one of these, I said, was federal property. Paid for by taxpayers. Designed to track smugglers and protect endangered wildlife. And Mrs. Crenshaw interfered with active operations. Dolores's face went through a spectrum of colors, red with rage, white with shock, green with nausea. Her lawyer tugged at her sleeve, whispering desperately, but she ignored him. Then Janet stepped forward, armed with her forensic evidence. The projector lit up with spreadsheets, charts, and photos. Her calm, steady voice narrated the thefts. $147,000 embezzled through shell companies, $31,000 diverted into offshore accounts. HOA reserve funds drained to pay for personal luxuries, BMW leases, vacations, credit card bills. The final slide hit like a hammer, the boat in her driveway, purchased with stolen HOA money. The crowd erupted, gasps, shouts, angry cries. Neighbors who had once cowered under Dolores's rules now pointed fingers, voices rising in righteous fury. And that's when Dolores snapped. She leapt from her chair, pointing wildly at me, at Janet, at anyone within range. "This is entrapment. This is government harassment," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "He seduced me, tricked me, all of this is discrimination against successful women." The laughter that rolled through the crowd was brutal, unforgiving. People booed. Veterans stood tall. Families shouted back, their anger spilling after months of silence. The room transformed into a theater of justice, every neighbor a witness to her collapse. Right on cue, U.S. Marshals entered. Their timing was so perfect it felt choreographed. They read aloud the charges, each one like a drumbeat echoing through the room. Wire fraud. Mail fraud. Civil rights violations. Theft of government property. Obstruction of federal investigations. Money laundering. Racketeering. 23 felony counts in total. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was sweeter than any applause. And yet, applause came anyway. Neighbors stood, clapping, cheering, some even crying as Dolores Crenshaw, the self-proclaimed Queen of Pinewood, was marched out past the cameras, her pearls gleaming under the harsh lights one last time. For the first time in 18 months, Pinewood Estates felt free. I stepped back to the microphone, badge gleaming. "Sometimes justice takes time," I said, "but it always arrives. And in this country, no one is above the law, not even HOA presidents who think pearls grant them immunity." The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. Dolores's empire collapsed faster than anyone imagined. Once the marshals led her out of the community center in handcuffs, the legal avalanche buried her. Within weeks, prosecutors rolled out their full case, 23 felony counts, including fraud, money laundering, racketeering, theft of government property, and civil rights violations. Her defense attorney tried to spin plea deals, but the evidence was airtight. Too many victims. Too much documentation. Too much media attention. Faced with decades in federal prison, Dolores folded. She pled guilty, trading a 20-year sentence for 8 years in federal custody. The pearls and BMW meant nothing now, pearls are contraband, and BMW keys don't open cell doors. The restitution order hit just as hard, $380,000 in damages, tripled under RICO statutes. Her personal accounts were drained, her mansion liened, and her credit destroyed. Civil rights settlements added another $150,000, divided among families she had harassed, Mrs. Bennett, the Martinez family, disabled veteran Tom. For once, discrimination had a price tag steep enough to matter. Her professional life was obliterated. Licenses revoked across multiple states. Sunshine Property Management dissolved. She'd never again hold authority over another neighborhood. But Pinewood was just getting started. The first HOA election in the post-Dolores era happened so quickly it made political transitions look sluggish. Maria Santos, the elementary school teacher, took over as president. Robert Kim, a nurse, became treasurer. Frank, the veteran, accepted a board seat, along with Janet, our forensic accountant turned hero. Their first official act. A community block party, funded entirely by recovered embezzlement money. The smell of burgers and barbecue smoke drifted through Pinewood, this time seasoned not with paranoia, but with relief. For the first time in months, neighbors laughed openly. Children played without fear. Veterans saluted, not out of duty, but celebration. The deeper reforms followed. Monthly financial reports went online for every homeowner to review. Anti-discrimination clauses were written into HOA bylaws. Accountability Day was established as an annual event, part barbecue, part workshop, part reminder never to let tyranny creep into the neighborhood again. A community garden bloomed in the common lot where Dolores once measured grass with military precision. It became a symbol of something bigger, freedom, growth, and resilience. The ripple effects went far beyond Pinewood. Colorado passed a state-level HOA Reform Act mandating financial audits and transparency. In Washington, congressional staffers cited our case while drafting federal oversight legislation. Advocacy groups held up Pinewood as the gold standard of resistance. HOA abuse victims across the country found new courage, pointing to our story as precedent. Even the Department of Justice took notice. Our case was written into new guidelines for investigating property management fraud, complete with examples from Dolores's downfall. What began as suburban pettiness had evolved into a blueprint for national reform. And for me? For the first time in years, I considered staying put. No more endless rotations between undercover assignments. No more temporary apartments and half-empty closets. Pinewood, against all odds, had become a place worth calling home. Janet and I discovered that justice wasn't our only shared language. Long nights of spreadsheets and federal reports turned into something more. A relationship built not on convenience, but on mutual respect, and maybe, just maybe, love. Together, we helped establish the Pinewood Community Justice Scholarship. Funded by recovered embezzlement money, it awarded $25,000 annually to law students studying housing rights and civil advocacy. Frank managed it with military precision, and the first recipient, an undocumented student Dolores once harassed, graduated magna cum laude, specializing in civil rights law. The legacy grew. Netflix released a documentary, The HOA Files, How One Federal Agent Dismantled Suburban Tyranny. HOA reform movements spread like wildfire, citing Pinewood as proof that ordinary citizens could fight back. Even Dolores couldn't resist adding to the story. From her prison cell, she began writing letters, handwritten apologies laced with regret. She admitted to 15 years of HOA abuse across multiple states. Her confessions became evidence in broader FBI investigations into property management fraud, exposing networks that had victimized thousands. Pinewood changed. Property values rose 12% once her grip was broken. Discrimination complaints dropped to zero. The community garden produced 2,400 pounds of food for local food banks. Visitors arrived from across the country, eager to learn how a small Colorado neighborhood had toppled its tyrant and rebuilt stronger than ever. As for me, I stood in my driveway one quiet morning, sipping coffee, watching kids ride bikes past the community garden. My Jeep gleamed in the sunlight, restored to federal standards but parked in peace. For once, the silence wasn't ominous. It was comforting. And I realized something important. Federal agents fight crime in jungles, deserts, and cities across the globe. But sometimes, the real battles are fought right here, in suburbs where petty tyrants think pearl necklaces make them untouchable. Dolores Crenshaw learned the hard way, no one is above the law. Not even an HOA president. And Pinewood Estates. It became the proof that communities can rise, rebuild, and thrive, when people stand together.